The senator from Florida.
Mr. President, I rise today to talk about my Sunshine Protection Act, a bipartisan, bicameral bill that returns power to each state and its citizens, that will end the twice-yearly time change and make daylight savings time the national year-round standard. I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of the Sunshine Protection Act, which is at the desk. Further, that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, that a motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there an objection? The senator from.
I do object to the legislation, and I'll outline my reasons a bit more later, but I defer to my good friends from Florida and Alabama and Rhode Island to speak on behalf of their bill before I explain my opposition to the bill.
The objection is heard.
Mr. President.
The senator from Florida.
So first I want to recognize the senator from Rhode Island to speak about the bill.
Mr. President.
The senator from Rhode Island.
Mr. President, each November we fall back into darkness, very literally. If we pass my Sunshine Protection Act and make daylight saving time permanent, we'd gain an hour of afternoon sunlight in the winter months for families to soak up after work and after school. This measure has been so bipartisan that it has previously passed this body by unanimous consent. Here is what President Trump said about it. The House and Senate should push hard for more daylight at the end of a day. Very popular. And more importantly, no more changing of the clocks, a big inconvenience, and for our government, a very costly event. My co-sponsor before Senator Scott came here was his predecessor from Florida, Senator Rubio, who is now our Secretary of State, who said that we should, and I'm quoting him here, stop enduring the ridiculous and antiquated practice of switching our clocks back and forth. Let's end the need to fall back and spring forward for good. I don't always agree with President Trump and with former Senator, now Secretary Rubio, but I sure do agree about this. I yield the floor.
The senator from Florida.
I'd like to recognize my co-sponsor from Alabama, Senator Tuberville.
Mr. President.
The senator from Alabama.
Mr. President, I come to the floor today to once again talk about the outdated practice of changing our clocks twice a year. This weekend, my constituents back home in Alabama and across America will be forced to change their clocks. As a result, it will be dark in Washington, D.C. at 5 p.m. next week. In the 5 years I've served here in the Senate, making daylight savings time permanent is the number one issue that I hear about back home. I'm proud to have joined my colleague, Rick Scott, earlier this year in reintroducing the Sunshine Protection Act to make daylight savings time permanent on the federal level. Unfortunately, it has been brought to the floor for a vote. So here I am advocating once again to make the outdated practice of changing our clock a thing of the past. For nearly 60 years, Americans have changed their clocks back and forth twice a year, but the roots of daylight saving time trace back much further. Daylight saving time was introduced during World War I and then reused again during World War II as a temporary way to help conserve fuel and energy. Following the ends of both wars, the decision was to spring forward and fall back was returned to individual states. It was until 1966 when the system of changing our clocks twice a year that we use now was made permanent. Changing our clocks twice a year might have made sense in the 60s, but it doesn't make sense anymore. The twice a year time change doesn't make sense today. We know the devastating impact of the disruption from so-called standard time has on Americans' health. Studies have suggested that disruption of sleep patterns due to time changes increases the risk of cardiovascular disease and physical injury. Northwestern Medical found that the fall back and the spring forward are connected to a 6% spike in fatal car accidents and 24% higher risk of heart attacks. Think about that. Additionally, the long-term health effects linked to changing our clocks include weight gain, cluster headaches, and depression. You would think we would listen to all that. Bottom line, shifting our clocks disrupts sleep patterns, and it has been proven time and time again to be harmful to the health. Thanks to RFK Jr.'s great work of HHS, a lot of Americans are taking their health more seriously and by trying to eat healthier and to get more sleep. Switching the clock back and forth is the exact opposite of making America healthy again movement that RFK Jr. has championed. It's bad for sleep, it's bad for nutrition, and it's bad for overall health. And for that reason, I push back and try to get this on the floor sooner or later, and I yield back to my colleague, Rick Scott.
Mr. President,
Senator from Florida.
I want to thank Senators Whitehouse and Tuberville for their support. Our Sunshine Protection Act is a bipartisan, bicameral bill that will allow states to end the twice-yearly time change and make daylight savings time the national year-round standard. In 2018, when I was governor of Florida, I signed legislation that will allow the state of Florida to stop the practice of changing the clocks. I've been working to get this passed since I've been in the Senate so the people of Florida, not the federal government, can make this choice for the families of Florida. Nearly 24 other states have joined Florida in choosing to lock the clock, pending the federal approval that will come by passing the Sunshine Protection Act, while still allowing other states to opt out if they wish. This bill is about states' rights. It allows the people of each state to choose what best fits their needs and the needs of their families. In Florida, that's permanent daylight savings time. I hear from Floridians on this constantly. I'm sure many of you have heard from your constituents as well. The American people are sick and tired of changing their clocks twice a year. It's confusing, unnecessary, and completely outdated. It's an understatement to say our nation has changed since the United States began changing the clocks over a century ago. For example, American households have electricity now. We also have self-driving cars, computers, cell phones. Now changing the clocks twice a year proves more of an annoyance to families than a benefit to them. The American people love having an extra hour of sunlight, especially in my state of Florida, where that means more time to enjoy the outdoors and activities with family. Studies also show the potential for reduced cardiac issues, strokes, seasonal depression, reduced robberies, and benefits to the agricultural and general economies with an extra hour of sunlight. And with President Trump committed to finally lock the clock, we can finally get this done for the American people. This bill is completely about individual states having the right to make their own decisions. I ask all of my colleagues to support the passage of the Sunshine Protection Act to make a common sense change that will simplify and benefit the lives of Americans and allow the people of each state to choose what is best for themselves and their families. And I yield to my colleague from Arkansas.
Mr. President,
The senator from Arkansas.
in January of 1974, millions of Americans traveled to work in school in darkness. Commuter trains were delayed. School children carried flashlights. Tragically, some of these kids were struck by cars and killed while walking to school in the dark. One woman from Long Island, speaking to the New York Times, summed up the black mood of the nation. "It's the end," she said. "I can't cope anymore. I'm just staying in bed." What calamity had befallen our nation? Had Soviet Russia finally attacked America? Had we suffered a nationwide power outage? Were the heavens conspiring to plunge our nation into darkness? No. As it turns out, the answer was more mundane and foolish. A few months earlier, Congress, in its eternal wisdom, had imposed a top-down change on every American's daily life, eliminating standard time and adopting daylight savings time year-round. Such a change to the nation's clocks had never happened before, except as an emergency rationing measure during wartime. While briefly popular, it proved deeply unpopular when reality set in. According to opinion polls, support for permanent daylight savings time fell by 30 percentage points in just 3 months. Only a few weeks after it was implemented, it was underwater. Congress beat a hasty retreat, repealing the law and changing the clocks back in October. What was supposed to be a 2-year experiment ended in abject failure after less than 1 year. It's said that those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And that's what would happen if Congress passes the so-called Sunshine Protection Act, once again ending standard time and imposing daylight savings time year-round. If permanent daylight savings time becomes the law of the land, it will again make winter a dark and dismal time for millions of Americans. By moving the clock back an hour in winter, permanent daylight savings time would push winter sunrises to an absurdly late hour, depriving Americans of morning sunshine that's essential for our safety and well-being. For many Arkansans, Permanent daylight savings time would mean the sun wouldn't rise until after 8 or even 8:30 a.m. during the dead of winter. 3 months out of the year, kids in towns like Bentonville, Fayetteville, and Fort Smith would start school ahead of the sun. Americans in northern states and on the western side of time zones would be even worse off. For instance, the sun wouldn't rise until nearly 9 o'clock during winter in Seattle. In Grand Rapids, the sun would rise as late as 9:15 a.m. And in Williston, North Dakota, they would not see the sun till almost 9:45 a.m. The darkness of permanent daylight savings time would be especially harmful for school children and working Americans. As we saw in 1974, kids would either walk to school in the pitch black or schools would have to push back start times. The choice would be between danger on the one hand and disruption on the other. Meanwhile, construction workers, farmers, and others who rise before the sun or who need the sun to work would be penalized. These workers might go 3, 4, even 5 hours in the morning without seeing the sun, which would hurt their quality of life and potentially their safety in the workplace. Then, of course, there are the health consequences of permanent daylight savings time. The senators from Alabama and Florida correctly indicate that clock changes can be bad for health. But the best evidence suggests that the natural rhythms of our internal body clocks align more closely with standard time than daylight savings time. A shift to permanent daylight savings time would make it harder to go to sleep at night and harder to wake up in the morning. Some of the nation's top medical associations, including the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Neurology, and the American College of Chest Physicians, have called for daylight savings time to be abolished, not extended. As one sleep scientist put it, of all the options available to us, permanent daylight savings time is the worst solution. Of course, the advocates for permanent daylight savings time try to put, well, a sunny face on this bill. Back in 2022, the senator from Massachusetts argued that it would mean more daylight hours and more smiles. And by the way, since the senator from Rhode Island mentioned it, let me say a word about what happened in 2022. We've heard from him that the Senate unanimously passed this bill. It's true as far as it goes, but the story is a little more complicated than that. To let you in on how things operate, when senators want to seek unanimous consent to pass a bill without a recorded vote, as my friends are doing today, an email goes out to all other Senate offices asking if a senator objects. I didn't personally object in 2022 for 2 reasons. First, I hadn't adequately communicated to my staff the depth of my opposition to this bill. Second, because of a miscommunication, I expected another senator who also opposed the bill to object. I take full responsibility for this mistake, though the search for someone else to blame is actively ongoing. A chief suspect, as usual, may be the Republican floor secretary. In any case, it's only a mistake if you don't have time to fix it. And fortunately, I fixed it later that year with like-minded friends in the House. Despite that setback, the proponents of permanent daylight savings time refuse to, if you will, let the sun set on this bill. They allege, as we've heard, that the change would stimulate the economy and even save the environment by reducing energy use. On the contrary, permanent daylight savings time would have negligible effects on energy use, as indicated by most studies and plain common sense. Any reduction in electricity use in the afternoon will be counterbalanced, of course, by increased use in the morning. It's largely 6 in one hand and half a dozen in the other. As to the supposed economic benefits, no doubt that a handful of industries would gain from the bill. That's why they've lobbied so hard for it over the years. This bill would benefit, for example, outdoor entertainment venues, seaside resorts, and bars. My good friends from Alabama and Florida sponsor this legislation, and they're representing their states well by doing so. An extra hour in the winter for the resorts of South Florida, the beautiful golf courses in southern Alabama and across the state of Florida, or deep-sea fishing in the Gulf of America or the Atlantic would be welcomed by many of the residents of these communities. As for my friends from Massachusetts and Rhode Island, have you ever spent a winter in Boston or Providence? The sun disappears there barely after 4 p.m. Little wonder they've joined the effort. These senators represent states that overwhelmingly benefit from year-round daylight savings time because of their latitude and longitude. I understand and I respect their positions, but as is often the case, these highly concentrated benefits for a few industries in a few regions are offset by widely distributed costs across many more industries throughout the entire country. And that's to say nothing of moms sending their kids to school in the dark of night. So why should we repeat history? It's probably because we've forgotten it. Most people don't remember the permanent daylight savings time debacle of 1974. And just about everyone hates to spring forward and fall back, as the saying goes. I don't like the biannual clock changes any more than the rest of you do. But unless we're willing to adopt permanent standard time and sacrifice the extra hour of evening light in the spring and summer for Little League ball games and summer vacations across the country, there's just not much to be done. Which is, when you think about it, a fundamentally conservative outlook. Not every human problem has a legislative solution. Sometimes we have to live with an uneasy compromise between competing priorities and interests. That's doubly true when considering how the movement of the stars and the planets affect the lives of 350 million souls spread across our vast continental nation. It brings to mind the story of King Canute, who wanted to teach his sycophants a lesson about the limits of mankind's power. He famously set his throne on the seashore and forbade the tide from coming in. Of course, the tide nonetheless came in, and as one historian recounted, disrespectfully drenched the king's feet and shins. The moral of the story, the king reminded his fawning court, is that the power of kings is empty and worthless, and there is no king worthy of name save him by whose will heaven, earth, and sea obey eternal laws. Good King Canute's wise words are as true now as they were then. No earthly ruler, not even this Congress, can alter the movements of the heavens. Not today, not in 1974, not ever. Therefore, I oppose the Sunshine Protection Act and will always oppose any effort to adopt daylight savings time year-round. Mr. President, I yield the floor.